One of the reflection questions at the end showcase event was, what did you gain from this experience? And so many of them said, I'd never thought of agriculture this way before. We were intentional about what we were doing in this process, but for them to actually identify, I'd never thought about agriculture in this way, was a huge success and a milestone.
Johnson County 4-H was awarded one of 5 $22,500 community grants through Science Matters, a national program created by Bayer and National 4-H. As part of the community-based grant, 15 youth from suburban Johnson County, some 4-H members and some not, have been exploring potential careers in agriculture that involve science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM. In addition, the youth learned how to use that knowledge to make a difference in their community. On today's Sound Living, fostering youth interest in science. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman. The grants brought together Bayer employees and 4-H leaders from 5 regions, like Nancy Bergdall, a teacher, Johnson County 4-H volunteer, and mother of one of the participants, to help the teens work through 3 science-based local challenges and to develop solutions that address each issue. Johnson County Extension Director Tara Markley says the grant also funded a trip for the 15 youth to participate in a National Youth Summit on Agri-Science in Washington, D.C. this past January.
And it was looking at 15 youth to look at what is happening science-related, both plant, agriculture, and in the community-wise. And so we put out an application for our youth and asked, kind of talked about what the overall grant was and finding their interest in the program. And, asking them basic questions. What does agriculture mean to you? Do you see yourself in an agriculture-related career? Which was interesting because they're like, well, I don't want to be a farmer, but I would like to be an engineer. And so it really gave the opportunity to talk about agriculture and careers within agriculture that aren't necessarily being the actual producer, but helping support with that engineering and mathematics side. So we got 15 youth signed up from all over the county and from varying degrees of rural to urban, and they were eager to be part of this program. In January of 2018, we all went to Washington, D.C. National 4-H Council puts on the Agri-Science Summit, and so this was a 4-day adventure at the National 4-H Conference Center where the youth heard from folks from Bayer, but also from other industry leaders, and USDA affiliates came in and talked about agriculture and the state of agriculture within the U.S. And while we were there, a little bit of prep happened beforehand, is that we identified 3 different groups, and we did a whole long process with them of identifying a community need issue that they were excited about and would like to think about and work on that was ag and science related. One group wanted to look at food insecurity and what that looked like within Johnson County. One of them wanted to focus on water conservation, and another one wanted to focus on animals and really focusing on zoonotic diseases. So we had a slight framework when we went to D.C., and then they had time throughout the sessions that were offered to really think about and learn more about those 3. And really, when we walked away from D.C., we started to finalize those action plans for when they came back to the county around those 3 groups. Once we were back in town, the food insecurity group started focusing on food deserts, and Nancy can talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but focusing on insecurity, food deserts, and container gardening. The water conservation group really wanted to talk about education and how to come up with some water conservation educational toolkits for 3rd to 5th graders. And then the zoonotic disease group, they really focus on creating educational pieces around what is zoonotic diseases. And they focus half on livestock and half on domestic animals, everything from ferrets and rabbits to cattle, and they had one on amphibians. Each group did a showcase event where they did an educational component within the community around those action items. 2 of the 3 groups really worked on surveys, so surveying the public about their knowledge base. And so kind of at the beginning that they did pre-surveys to really find out and gauge what the public's knowledge was. And then we had our final showcase event where they presented to their peers and to their families, and we actually brought in folks from the local Bayer facility to hear what they did and how they did it. Another culminating event at the end was that the youth got to go to the Shawnee plant and actually tour. So they got to put on lab coats and go in and see what was happening at the actual facilities. It was pretty intense, and this was all outside of their normal schoolwork and 4-H work. So we worked with the kids to really say, how could this relate back to your schoolwork and what you're doing? It was a time commitment for sure.
Nancy, could you go into a little bit more detail about what you did in terms of the food insecurity project?
Sure. There were 6 of the 15 kids on the food insecurity side of it. And it kind of just beautifully worked out that 2 kids did research on food insecurity, food deserts, mapping, researching any issue that's happening in Johnson County with that. 2 other kids kind of focused on container gardening because they thought they wanted to get healthy food, healthy vegetables to those in need. And then 2 of the other kids wanted to teach nutrition education and what that meant in the community. Charlie and Sophia were the 2 that kind of really initially took this group from the beginning. They started doing research and finding out where the needs were in our county and met with an extension director who could help us with low income. The kids all decided when they were in Washington, D.C., when they were working on their poster sessions, that they really wanted to work with elderly people that were in need. And so that's what Denise Diaz helped us with here in the county, finding locations where the kids could serve in that capacity. Charlie had met with a gentleman that was in charge of Mission Southside who helps with people in need. And so between the Extension Service and Mission Southside, we got a list of names and places where we could kind of help out. And so there was one location that ended up being right in the heart of the food desert, the map that Charlie found and created. They started doing surveys, went out into the community. And just so you know, these 6 kids that were on my team are actually from 6 very different locations in Johnson County. I had Spring Hill, I had one from DeSoto, one from West Lenexa, one from East Lenexa, one from Overland Park, and one from Olathe. So our group was very diverse, which really helped because the surveying, they ended up having 120-some people do the survey. It gave them information about what people know about the needs of food insecurity in the county, how they thought they could solve that problem, and nutrition education-wise, what should be taught. And so the kids then took that survey. They met with a master gardener to figure out how they could plant vegetables, what needed to happen, how they could teach that. And so as their supervisor, I was kind of doing whatever the kids were kind of leaning towards. I was kind of doing some back checking and just seeing where we would lead. And so we ended up at a facility in Olathe, which is kind of a central part for all of the kids to meet, which actually ended up working out beautifully. It was a 55 and over senior living facility, and they had 2 raised beds that they allowed us to plant many different vegetables, broccoli, peas, radishes, spinach, lettuce, and the kids took them from the very beginning process of that, planting, teaching them nutrition education, and also having them do the survey about food insecurity in the county. We actually just finished that program here recently. The kids have been going over there after the initial planting and meeting with the residents, and they have since used up all of those vegetables, doing potlucks in their facility. Residents just going out and enjoying pulling pea pods off the thing. Radishes were the first to go. So it really was a very successful situation, but it took a lot of hard work, a lot of planning. Gardening is not an easy thing to do, and they learned that.
There actually is some science involved in gardening, isn't there?
Everything from just the timing, planning, the length of time. It really helped that we had a master gardener come to a couple of our meetings and assist our students in understanding the time frame and how to do it. And of course, this particular year in Johnson County, the first 3 weekends of April, we had snow. And so in our initial time to meet with these residents and begin the planting process was the 4th weekend in April. And I'll tell you what, as a supervisor and wanting everything to be successful, it was a little stressful.
I can imagine. It sounds like the residents kind of took this to heart and probably were a real good support system for this group.
Well, I can tell you that out of this, there's been some great relationship building. They were very impressed with the 6 kids that came in. One particular resident has become just a really close friend of mine, and I actually invited her over to my home this week because I knew we were going to be doing this interview, and just wanted to get her perspective of what happened. And she said she thoroughly enjoyed it, that the residents that participated loved being with the kids. It made those people feel young again. She said it was so nice to see teenage kids who were so enthusiastic about what they were doing and were really into it. And so she said the group felt really comfortable, and the bringing together of two generations of people, the older and the younger, I just believe that that is so necessary in our communities today. I think this was a total success. And another resident said it's just really refreshing to hear young people doing constructive things today. And that's what this grant really spoke volumes for these residents.
What about the students? What did they take away from this? What were some of their reactions?
Well, they loved being with the residents. And in fact, one of the gentlemen that was part of our group, he wanted to be a part of the gardening, but he wasn't sure about things. And so two of my girls were talking to him about watering the garden. And the next thing you know, this gentleman, Stan, he said he'd be willing to do it for 1 week. And Stan ended up being our primary waterer for the entire project until he got sick. You know, at first he wasn't so sure, but he really got involved in it. And I think that's because the kids just kept talking to him and engaging him. And that was the big part of this, was the relationship building that I saw happening.
But you also saw that they gained maybe a better understanding of how science and technology can fit into the agricultural area?
Absolutely. And I can speak not only as a volunteer, but my son Charlie was on the team. He was the one boy. There were 5 girls and 1 boy on the team. And he wanted to do this because of the science. He doesn't have much experience with agriculture. And he came away from this project being super excited about opportunities that are out there that he didn't have any idea until he went to this Agri-Summit conference in Washington, D.C.
And I would reiterate that there were several youth. One of the reflection questions at the end showcase event was, what did you gain from this experience? And so many of them said, I'd never thought of agriculture this way before. And I was just sitting there thinking, what a success, because I didn't plan for them to, we were intentional about what we were doing in this process, but for them to actually identify, I'd never thought about agriculture in this way, was a huge success and a milestone. And the zoonotic group, one of the youth worked hand in hand with the vet from Bayer on all of their scientific information for the flyers, really professionally done flyers, educational pieces they did for the zoonotic diseases. And so when we visited the Shawnee facility, that one of the vets came and actually talked about what he does. He doesn't necessarily see animals, but as a veterinarian, how his work relates back to what they're doing with Bayer. And so just really all those opportunities that those youth would not have gotten had we not been a part of this grant was amazing.
Is there a possibility that this grant can continue?
Well, that is very ironic because just last week, National 4-H Council announced that, yes, there is going to be a year 2. And so what that looks like for year, are we going to take a group of year 2s and then gather a group of year 1s and have a culmination? Because what's happened as well is each of the teams, they wanted to continue the work outside of the grant. The grant ended June 5th, but they had things that they identified they wanted to do throughout the summer, specifically at the county fair. And the food group is going to present to the county food policy council. So the youth are invested in these programs and these community action plans that they want to see through. So being able to have a year 2, we're in the talks of, okay, so now what? What does that look like?
Well, it sounds like a program that everybody is benefiting from and one that really has a good tie between kind of the science angle and the 4-H angle.
Very much so. Bears, their whole thing is people, plants, and animals. So if that doesn't scream 4-H, I'm not sure what does. So being able to connect the people in our communities, having that plant and the plant science background and incorporating the animals, it's a perfect fit.
That's Johnson County Extension Director Tara Markley and 4-H volunteer Nancy Bergdall. Information about STEM programs offered through Kansas 4-H is available online at kansas4h.org. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.